Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast, episode number 85, part 1, Shed Hunting with Jeremy Moore of DogBone Hunter. Big Buck Registry is a virtual museum of hunting stories. We preserve a piece of Americana by interviewing and recording hunters about their hunts and experiences from across the country. And who knows, maybe we'll learn a thing or two along the way that'll help us take our hunt to the next level.
Hey, this is Jeff Schmitz from Big Game Logic, and you're listening to my number one podcast on the internet, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
This is Jim Koger with TrophyPursuit.com, and you're listening to Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Hi, I'm Tim Burnett with Solo Hunter, and you're listening to my favorite podcast, the Big Buck Registry's Big Buck Podcast.
Welcome to the show. This is Jay Scott, your host, and I am also here with Dusty Phillips, the co-host from Ohio, our field correspondent. What's happening, Dusty?
I'm kind of bummed out, man.
That's not like you. You're not ever bummed out. This is bad news for the world. What's going on?
I may shed a tear, man. Hunting season's been out now, and it's a struggle, Jay.
Oh,
you know something though? I kind of still I'm getting re-energized.
Yeah, I'm feeling you.
You know what's coming?
Yeah,
these deer that we didn't get a chance to kill are going to be shedding their antlers.
Yes, they are,
and we're going to be able to do some shed antler hunting.
I got 11 deer running around my yard right now.
That's
in the deep
crazy.
snow. Did you see that video I made?
Absolutely, man. It's amazing what the deer adjust to, and they know where somewhat of a food source is there in your neighbor's yard and your yard.
Yeah,
and they're using that to get them through these tough times in that deep snow there in New Hampshire.
Yeah, they're eating all my neighbor's ornamental, flowery, beautiful things that she works on during the summertime, and she tells me don't shoot my deer, and I'm like, hey, no problem.
Right on. But maybe just maybe you'll get one of them big bucks up there to shed his antlers right in your yard.
Well, that's what I'm hoping for, man.
That'd be sweet.
But you know what would be cool is if I had some help from a canine fellow. And
yeah, that seems to be the talk of the town here lately.
Yeah, I mean, I can go out and I'll find them when I'm out hunting, but and I certainly stumble upon them. But man, if I had a dog, it would be killer.
Yeah, you know what would make for a really cool show for the Big Buck Registry?
I sure do.
What? Tell me what?
DogBone.
Yeah, I mean, I think that DogBone, it's a new system for shed dogs, for shed hunting with a canine. Yeah, I think we ought to get Jeremy Moore there at DogBone on the show.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've done. Jeremy's waiting on the other line for us right now, ready to patch in when you give us the green light thumbs up.
I'm super excited to hear how this product works, how this product can take your shed hunt to the next level.
I just love the concept of shed hunting. I mean, in a lot of ways, that's what hunting is for many of us. And there's always the bonus of meat. But now you get to go find all those great antlers and keep kind of a tabs on what deer made it through. If you've got that kind of relationship, made it through the deer hunting season. Shed hunting is a great way to do it, and it's a great way to get outside when some of the colder months. Get your kids involved. You don't have to spend a ton of time. It's not like you're sitting there all day waiting for a deer to show up. This is a quick in and out. Stop, warm up, go back out. Kids love this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of them things where they don't cost a whole lot.
No, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, it's efficient on the pocket and the wallet. If you get into it with a canine and get into the DogBone system, it's really affordable. It really is, and it's family fun. It don't get no better than that.
Yep. And Jeremy has spent some time with product development trying to come up with a system to train a dog to shed hunt through some proprietary mixes of scent placed on some of these I don't know, how would you describe the antler? It's a softer antler, right? It's something it's kind of like a dummy antler, like a silicone dummy antler. That's what I've had it in my hand, the DogBone system, and it's a really unique product, and I want to get into learning more
about shed hunting with a dog. You know,
I do too.
A shed dog.
I do too. And we've talked about this a little bit because you wanted to get a dog, and we sat in your pickup truck and we talked about this whole aspect. And I'm just psyched that we found somebody that has such. I mean, and Jeremy's super knowledgeable about all this stuff. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, let's get Jeremy Moore on the phone from DogBone.
I'm just psyched he's going to share his knowledge with all of us right now. Jeremy Moore, welcome to the Big Buck Registries Big Buck Deer Hunting Podcast. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, we're psyched, man. We're psyched. This is a topic we haven't really covered yet, and I know Dusty has a ton of questions because he sent me his entire protocol, which he never does, by the way. He never writes stuff down, ever.
You're lying to the listeners.
I'm not lying.
I do sometimes.
No, you don't.
Most of the times, it's a subject that is a mental preparation. It's already booked in. But, you know, we're getting Jeremy on from DogBone. Yeah. And it's going to be one of them things where I'm going to get a little more in depth on this podcast because it's something that sparks my interest that in the future, in the real near future, that I'm looking for puppies now. So it's going to be something I'm going to be working on.
Yeah, this is a very cool topic. And, you know, for people that are looking to find more sheds, this is a great system from what we can tell. And Jeremy, I'm going to ask you the obvious question. Why do we need a dog to find an antler?
Well, you know, the obvious answer to that question is the idea that, you know, a dog covers just so much ground. And we actually we kind of say it, you cover more ground, you find more sheds. And I think that's true by yourself, you know, as a person shed hunting, but I think it's really true with the idea of the dog. And the second obvious answer is, you know, we're somewhat, as a shed hunter, I'm limited to visual. I have to see the shed. And the great part about the dogs is not only is it visual, but, you know, there's scent involved with it too. So I've got more feet, you know, more feet on the ground. They're covering more ground. And I also add a sense of smell when we incorporate the dog.
Gotcha. So are you saying that antlers have a scent to them that a dog can smell?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we do a lot of seminars, and that question comes up all the time. You know, you're kidding me. You can't, there's no way a shed smells. And the reality is it definitely smells, and everything has scent. And, you know, I always say if you don't believe that shed antlers smell, take a few fresh sheds that you found, you know, that are fresh from that year, put them in a Tupperware tub, you know, that you can seal, put the cover on it, and then put it in your pickup truck on a sunny day. Let it heat up. And then when you open up that cover, put your nose right down in it and take a big whiff. And I'll tell you right now, it'll just about knock you down.
Really?
And the reason is,
good.
yeah, the reason is that scent is so focused and concentrated at that point. But when you start talking about dogs and their abilities to smell, they don't need that focused concentration to smell. They are sensing. It's incredible, you know, the level of how acute their scent is.
Interesting. Jeremy,
I wonder if that has something to do with the scent gland that's right there on top of the skull.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I simulate antler scent as best I can. I actually make a scent that we use for training. But the way I came up with it, I make it myself. The way I came up with it is I took a hard look at, you know, real antlers, actual shed antlers, and what makes up the scenting elements of it. And the reality is bone smells. Bone's got scent to it. And an antler, that's all it is a bone. The fastest growing bone out there. And bone has scent to it. And I know that because I've had dogs find sheds for us that say they lay in a CRP field or lay for years, and all it is the bone. I mean, that's it. And the dogs are able to smell it. And but I think when it comes to, especially when you're talking about fresh sheds or sheds that were dropped that year, when you look closely at the base of an antler, there's different things on it. There's hair. There's always hair caked into it. There's oftentimes, you know, I've found them real fresh when they're bright red. I mean, they're cherry red. They're from the blood where the calcification took place and the antler dropped. So there's blood, there's hair, there's all sorts of different stuff that's found right at that base. And I think you're right. The forehead gland scent is, you know, probably associated with a lot of that hair that's on the shed antler. And that's all good scenting elements for our dogs.
Absolutely.
So how do you develop your scent then? And if this is proprietary, let me know. I don't want to give away your secrets, but
yeah, no. I make it myself, and those scent elements that I just mentioned, I incorporate all of them. And it took a while for me to to come up with the right proportions and how the ratios of how we did it to best simulate. There's a few things in there that I know are involved with an antler scent. I don't tell a lot of people about it, but I know it's involved with that antler, and we incorporate that as well into the scent. Now I make it into a liquid scent. It's water based, and our scent is completely 100% natural, and it's preserved naturally. And when I make it as a liquid. And I did that because my background is bird dogs and gun dogs. That's how I started training dogs.
Right.
And I use a lot of the liquid scents out there, liquid pheasant scents, the duck scents. I use them on my bumpers and on my different training tools. So when I came up with the idea of our line of products for how we're going to go about training these shed dogs, I simulated the steps that I would take for, say, a pheasant dog or a duck dog. And that's where that liquid scent came in. Now, we recently partnered up with a company, real well-known company, Conquest Scents. They're real well-known in the deer world. And they have a proprietary process where they make a stick scent. And what we did was we actually partnered with them this last year, and we're taking our liquid scent and putting it into their stick formula. So now what we're doing is offering, from a trainer standpoint, I have different applications for each method or style of scenting. And so now we've got it in both liquid, and then we also have it as a stick form.
Gotcha.
Works really well for different situations and different times of the year.
So is it like a combination of like ground bone, scent gland, hair, dirt?
Yeah, it's all the above and then some involved.
Okay,
with it.
gotcha. And you just grind it into a paste and add water, essentially?
Well, yes and no.
Okay.
There's a little bit more to it than that. The thing about the antler scent is, the thing about with the actual antler is, you can't grind antler. When you grind antler, if you've ever cut an antler before, or cut the antlers off of a deer, it gets a scent of kind of a burnt scent. It smells like burnt hair.
Oh yeah,
and
it's
that's
awful.
Not natural.
It's the top 3 worst smells I've ever smelled.
Right.
I swear.
Yes, exactly. It burns into your memory. So it does the same with the dog. So there's a process that I go about doing it a little bit differently, and I think we're the only ones out there that do it. So I'm gonna kind of keep it that way. You know what I mean? But
right
no,
on.
it's something that it took a few years for us to kind of perfect it and get it to where it is right now.
Okay, and that's what I meant by the proprietary. I don't want your exact formula, but I want to get an idea how you go about it. So tell me about where you're from.
I'm actually from Wisconsin. I'm up near Green Bay, Wisconsin. I live about 25 minutes outside of Green Bay. It's a little town called Pulaski. But yeah, we're kind of in the heart of the Midwest and kind of in the heart of pretty good whitetail country.
Gotcha. So what led you to get away from the pheasant dog training stuff, and maybe you're still doing it, I don't know, to kind of get into this? You don't just do this every day.
Right. What
led you to this whole thing?
Well, it was interesting because I started out, my background is construction, actually. I have a degree in construction management, and I started training gun dogs for fun. I did it because my parents have a small kennel. They raise golden retrievers, and so I was brought up raising golden retrievers and as gun dogs, as bird dogs. And when I went to college over on the west side of the state of Wisconsin, and a lot of my buddies were from Minnesota, and the Minnesota guys were all big duck hunters. And so I really got into duck hunting at that point, and that's when I got serious about training dogs. To me, the funnest part about bird hunting was handling dogs. I fell in love with it. And so what I did was focused my efforts and my time on training these gun dogs. And I started taking on a few dogs of friends and then friends of friends. And next thing I know, I was always training a few dogs at the same time. And at the same time, I was working full-time construction. And when I thought about it, I spent 5 years in college in kind of the back, like right just outside of Buffalo County, if you're familiar with Buffalo County, Wisconsin.
Yes.
And just phenomenal deer area. And I spent 5 years there, and I really didn't deer hunt much. And I kind of kicked myself, and I thought, well, I really had an opportunity to do some good deer hunting. And I'm from Wisconsin, and deer hunting is just a big, big part of our culture. And I have always been, kind of obsessed with deer. And so I got to the point where I said, I don't have enough time in the fall to do both and do both right. If you're going to shoot a lot of birds, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of scouting. you really kind of got to dedicate yourself to it. Well, you guys know that the same is true with shooting a big deer. It takes time and it takes a lot of effort, and I didn't have enough time to do both right. So I decided, I want to get back to focusing on trying to kill big deer. And at the same time, I had really nice dogs, really good gun dogs, and I wasn't using them anymore. And I thought about it. I thought, well, how can I use these dogs to help me out with my deer hunting stuff? And this was years ago. This is 6-7 years ago. I had heard about guys shed hunting with dogs, but I had never, saw anyone tell you how to do it. Really what I did was I Googled it and I tried to find out some information on it. And the only information that was out there was a couple articles. One of them, you'll still Google it today, you'll find it in an Outdoor Life article that talked about a guy that did it. It never said anything, never told you how to do it. So I thought, well, this is something I'm going to try to do. And I kind of went about it trial and error. And I really went back to my style of training a gun dog. And I took an old dog of mine. She was 8 years old, great gun dog. And I cross-trained her to pick up some sheds for me. And that first year, I found more sheds with her than I had found my whole life shed hunting before that. So I was convinced this is the way to do it. And so I went out and I bought a pup. And the intentions were, I'm going to train this dog to shed hunt. And I went about it real similar to how I would, training any dog, building up good foundation of obedience, and got to the point where the pup was about 6 months old and retrieving for me. And I pitched a hard antler for her. And again, no one had told me how to do this. So I threw an antler for her. She ran up to it with a lot of enthusiasm, which is what I want out of my retrieving dogs. And she poked herself with that hard horn, and she rolled right over and yipped. She got up and she looked at that shed and she came running right back to me. And the reality is she thought that shed bit her. She hated it. She didn't want anything to do with it. Here I was with a 6-month-old dog that I was going to train just to shed hunt with, and she's afraid of shed. So
right.
I really had to sit back and think, boy, I screwed this up. And I thought, how can I fix this? And that's really where the whole idea came for, developing, first off, information on how to do it. And again, it took me trial and error. It took me a while to do it. But my idea was there's got to be a better way to introduce these dogs to shed antlers. And, when I trained my bird dogs, I didn't just put them in a pen with a rooster and go, I hope I get a bird dog out of it, because it just won't work. So I take steps. I use a balled up sock, and I go to canvas bumpers and tape wings, and I add scent. And I use cold game and fresh kill game and live pigeon. I do all these steps, and I get them to fed. Well, I thought take a similar approach and get these dogs to antlers in a positive way. My dogs don't retrieve sheds because they love sheds. They retrieve sheds because they like to retrieve, and I introduce it to them in a positive way. That's where we came up with a training dummy to get them there, and then some scent, and then we wrote a book, and we kind of added on to the line of products to where we are today with it.
Gotcha.
Tell me about the training dummy.
Sure. So the training dummy is designed, like I said, it's real similar to the approach of, there's training done. If you want to train a pheasant dog, you go to any sporting goods store or go online and Google it, and you can order all sorts of tools for training a bird dog. And there's canvas bumpers, there's wings, there's things that look like ducks, there's things that look like pheasants. So when I thought about it, I thought, I realized the importance, and this is just from training enough dogs to realize, if you want a dog to like something, you have to introduce it to them in a positive way. And you got to make sure it stays positive, especially early on in the training. So I compare it to a gun-shy dog. Dogs aren't born gun-shy.
Right.
They're conditioned to be gun-shy, and the way they're conditioned is oftentimes not intentional, but they're conditioned to be gun-shy by introduction to loud noises the wrong way. And so when I introduced that dog of mine to an antler, that antler shape was a really important part of this thing. And the introduction was not positive, it was negative. It jabbed her, it poked her. She, again, remember, I personally use, I like to use these little English labs, but any retrieving dog will work. And most retrievers have been bred for 100 years to have soft mouth. You always hear about a soft mouth dog or a hard mouth dog. You don't want the hard mouth dogs. You want them soft mouth. Well, soft mouth dogs and hard horns don't go together real well. They have a tendency to not like that feel in their mouth. So when I introduced that little dog to that hard horn, there was all sorts of negative. It was a hard feel in her mouth. It was a sharp jab and a poke to her. Tons of negatives. So all of a sudden I had a dog that didn't like it. And it's very difficult to change that. When you introduce something to a dog, it's hard to change it and convince them otherwise, whether it's going to be good or bad. So when I came out with the idea of this dummy, and I said, well, I'll make it look like an antler, but I don't necessarily want it to feel like an antler, and I don't necessarily want it to act like an antler if they happen to jab themselves or poke themselves. And the other thing is with young dogs, she was 6 months old, she could handle it pretty well, but I like starting young dogs in what I call shape conditioning, and it's conditioning a specific shape to equal something, equally retrieve or equal something good. So when these little puppies, young dogs, pick this training dummy up of ours, they're usually pretty clumsy, and they might trip, and they might, fall on top of, and not including poking themselves and jabbing themselves. Well, if I make this training dummy look like an antler, but not necessarily hurt them when they do that, and I can keep it positive for them, I can start imprinting that antler shape early on and do it successfully and do it positive. So I found a plastic. I mean, this is just, I didn't know how do you go about doing that. Well, I made some phone calls, and I kind of beat the bush a little bit and found actually a manufacturing company here in the Midwest out of Minnesota. And I explained my idea to him, and they worked with me real close to come up with a mold and to come up with some prototypes and some samples. And we started tinkering with a different formula of what the consistency should be for the material. And through trial and error, we came out with a prototype, and I used it actually to train a couple dogs. And I wanted to be sure that it worked, and I wanted to be sure that there was success with it. And I had a ton of success, and the light went on, and I thought, gosh, this is the answer. This is a great way of going about it. So from there, I decided I'm going to try to do this and turn this into even a company or a business. And all the while, it was kind of in the evenings working on it. It was, full-time job, construction, and at night, do everything I could to try to get this thing off the ground.
Gotcha.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great.
Very cool. Would you say that you're the industry leader in this type of thing?
I think we're probably, I know we're the first ones to come out with something like this. I think, I hope we're the leader in it. I hope my idea is, we're a company that came about because we came across a problem. We came across something that we didn't have an answer for, and there was nothing out there for. There wasn't anything that was there to help me. So my thought was, only because I seemed to be able to have a lot of success with it early on, I felt like, gosh, this is a good answer. This is something. And you got to remember, I up until this point, I didn't consider myself a professional trainer by any means. I trained some real nice dogs, and I have a hard time calling myself a professional trainer still today. Like, I think of professionals, and I think of the NFL and the NBA and those types of professionals. When it comes to dog training, I guess technically you're a professional if you get paid. I guess that's how they classify it. Well, up until this point, I was barely doing that. So I feel like, as far as being a leader in it, I think the thing that's important to us is that if we're going to come out with stuff to train dogs, it's got to be effective. It's got to work. And it's got to work for not necessarily professional trainers, because I think, there's a million different ways to go about training dogs. And I'll be the first person to say there's no one way to do it. There's all sorts of ideas and methods that come into training. I think that as far as this industry or this part of the industry goes, as far as training shed dogs, I like to think that we have products that make sense to both the pros, because I know there's a lot of kennels that use what we have out there, which I'm super proud of. I think it's awesome to be able to say that. But I also think it's important to say, when we do a seminar, it wasn't that many years ago I was sitting in the crowd of that seminar and watching as many dog trainers as I could and listening to as many guys talk as I could and gals talk and reading books and watching DVDs, and I took as much of that stuff in as I could, and then I tried to fit it into my own style of training and specific to the dogs I was training. And I think, now we have DVDs out and we have books and we do seminars and we do all that stuff. I do all that stuff. I think it's important that to be able to connect with people that want to sit in and take as much of our information as they can and apply it themselves. So if that's being a leader, I think that, then yeah, I think we could be considered that, but I think it's important that we have stuff that works. That's what's important to me.
Gotcha. So being first kind of automatically makes you the industry leader, I would assume.
Sure.
Which is
sure.
It's a great position to be in, because you're kind of creating something that didn't exist before, which is awesome. And it's just,
yep.
I'm sure people have dabbled in it on their own trying to get something to work, but you're actually
sure.
kind of developing a whole new plan that you feel works, and you can teach somebody else how to do it too.
You bet.
Got it.
From the dummy, where do you go after the dummy? What other products did you come up with to go with the dummy in the field?
So what we tried to do is, and this is how I break down. I'm going to oversimplify it a little bit here, but I like doing that because I always say when it comes to training, and specifically shed dogs, I think there's a misconception out there that I think that it's just a super complicated process, and it, it's really grueling, and it takes expertise, and I don't think it should be looked at that way. What we've tried to do is we try to say, let's break this into 3 simple steps. So. And that's oversimplifying because there's obviously steps in between, but the 3 steps that I think are most important and are real important to remember is shape first. We're going to shape condition, and that's specifically where that dummy comes in. We want to connect the shape of an antler to something positive, and for most retrievers, a retrieve is the ultimate reward. So we say shape first. We say scent second. Introduce the way these things are going to smell, because we talked about it a little bit earlier. Shape, our dogs are going to hunt with their eyes, but maybe more importantly, they're going to hunt with their nose. So the second major step is the introduction of the scent, what this antler is going to smell like. And that's where that liquid scent comes in, and that's where that stick-form scent comes in.
So was the liquid the second product that you've come out with?
Yeah, well, they kind of came out simultaneously because
okay.
I had the dummy, but then I immediately realized the need for what else are the dogs going to use? They're going to use their nose as much. So
right, absolutely. Okay, carry on.
And then the third thing that we say is the feel. What's this thing going to feel like? Because I always say change when you're training, change one element at a time. Don't overwhelm your dog. We always say, and this goes back to everything from obedience on out. I always preach the idea of incremental training, which is you can't go from A to Z with a dog, but you can go from A to B and from B to C and C to D, and we can get them to Z. So when we start talking about changing one element at a time, the first element was the shape, the second element was the smell, and the third element is the feel. So step 3 for us is, we want to take that training dummy with the scent that our dog's been conditioned to successfully, and now we're just going to change one element. We're going to change the way it feels. We're going to use a real shed antler. So we actually offer real shed antlers, and I sort through them all. I mean, we go through every antler is not the best antler to introduce your dog to. So I go through and I pick a specific kind of range as far as size of antler. I don't want to use anything but a real shed. I don't want to use cutoffs. We talked about it earlier, what scent is, how the scent is affected when you cut an antler. I don't want to use a cutoff for my dogs. I've heard some people say, well, just take the tines and cut all the tines off of the antler. Well, my question on that is, A, you really alter the natural scent of an antler. The second thing is if you cut all the tines off of it, what does it look like? It doesn't look like an antler anymore. All of a sudden it looks like a stick. So I don't want to, what I want to do is use an antler that kind of simulates or is close to the size of that training dummy. And that training dummy was designed to be specifically, I don't want it real big because, again, the bigger it is, the harder it is. And early on, I want these dogs to have success. And so we offer real shed antlers, and we sell them with our product line. And it's going to be pretty close, relatively close to the size of the training dummy. So those are 3 of the products that cover the 3 basic steps. A couple extensions off of that are I came out with a brown training dummy. So the original training dummy that comes with it, we offer a kit with a training booklet and a bottle of scent in the dummy. It's a white dummy, bright white. And the reasoning behind it is when I train gun dogs and bird dogs, I use different colored canvas bumpers. I use bright white ones early on. And it's because I think people say dogs are colorblind, and I don't know necessarily if they are or not. I think they see definite shade. And when you have that bright white dummy, there's a color contrast. So it's easier for my dogs to see that bright white color contrast. So when we start our pups out and I start our dogs out for the first time with the antler, as long as it's not snow on the ground, this time of year we got a lot of snow on the ground, so you throw the white dummy and it blends in pretty good. But when there isn't snow on the ground, that white dummy stands out. So I added in a brown training dummy. And the reason is it allows me to transition the dog off of visual to forcing them to use their nose a little bit more without making the big jump to the hard antler. So much like when I train pheasant dogs, I start using colored canvas bumpers. It's to condition my dog to use its nose more than its eyes. So we do that with the training dummy as well.
Amazing.
Very cool. So this in February is the time of year that I usually think of shed hunting. Is that kind of when we should start thinking about doing shed hunting in general?
Yeah, it's funny because as far as there's a difference between, I think there's a difference between when we should start thinking about actually shed hunting and we should start thinking about training our dogs. And the funny part about it is I see it, and I'm guilty of it. I'll be the first person to say I'm one of those guys that the seasons kind of run together for me. We fish, we hunt, we hunt all sorts of stuff, and my mind kind of shifts gears as the seasons change. And so when from a retail standpoint, I definitely see that I know I can just about tell you when different states start closing down their deer season. The reason I can tell you that is I can watch where our orders come from for shed training stuff, because all of a sudden we'll get an influx of orders from a specific state or area, part of the country, where all of a sudden we're getting a bunch of orders from them. Well, it's not a coincidence, but it usually is shortly after their deer season's closed. And I think the reason is because up until the season's closed, we're all pretty focused on hunting, and we're trying to figure out how to kill these deer. And as soon as the season's done, we know what didn't get killed, and the next thing we want to do, and we see it more and more every year, is the next kind of season for a deer hunter is, well, now I got to start thinking about picking up his sheds, because we've, as hunters, we've evolved into hunting specific deer. I mean, we with the evolution of trail cameras and all the different stuff that's out there right now, we as hunters hunt specific deer. I mean, we name them. We know everything but their birthday. And what part of shed hunting I think is a critical part of that, a key part of that. And so when we start talking about shed, I know guys, and I've picked them up as early as December. I picked, and we're talking deer that, there's obviously some situations that will alter this, but, if a deer is wounded, they have a tendency to shed earlier than if they're not wounded. But I have seen deer that are perfectly healthy shed as early as in December, and in some places prior to the seasons being closed. But I've also seen them hold late, late end of March into April even. And that's even up here, up in Wisconsin. Down south, I know they hold them, I think, even later than that at times. So there is a window that probably varies depending on where you're at. But I'm a believer in this. For my specific shed hunting, I don't have access to a ton of land. I'll be honest, I get invited to some really good spots, and I'm lucky. We get to go to some awesome spots shed hunting. But as a rule for myself, I don't have thousands and thousands of acres. So if I'm limited to a couple hundred acres, the way I gauge when I start looking is I use my trail cameras, and I'm not going to start looking until I know most, if not all, of the deer have shed. And that might mean I got to wait a little while. That might mean February, March before I start looking. But the reason is because deer are so sensitive to pressure. If I've got deer living on my property and I got a good shot at finding their sheds, if they're on my land, if I go in there too early because one of those deer shed and I want to go find it and I bump them, it doesn't take much pressure to move them off my property, and all of a sudden now they're on my neighbors and I can't, I'm not going to be able to find those sheds. So for me personally, I like to wait as late as I can. When you do that, there's a couple things you're up against. You're up against squirrels and different rodents and different things chewing on the antlers, because the longer they lay, the more likely they're to get chewed. The other thing is if you're hunting public ground, if you're hunting ground that other people are going to be shed hunting on as well, I don't want to wait too long because it'll get picked through pretty quick. So you kind of got to weigh all that stuff. But as when the deer specifically start dropping, I think it ranges anywhere from December to say April. Gotcha.
Okay. So the training, I think the training is different than actually shed hunting, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like you got to train your dog well before you get into those February, March, April months when the shed hunting is prime. And so when do you start training a dog?
Well, it's a good question. Depending on the age of the dog. And so I think you can look at it two ways. I think you can look at it from like a puppy standpoint where you got little ones from anywhere from say 7 weeks old until, honestly, I call them puppies till they're about 2 years old, because I just think that there's a maturing that takes place between that period of time that I still consider them very impressionable. And I think pups are real impressionable. So there's that, and then you've got the older dog. ways. I've done dogs both ways. I know a lot of people that have had success, whether it be with an older dog or when it comes to starting a young dog. I think it's real important to start forming habits as early as possible, because when you start talking about training a dog, training dogs is nothing more than forming habits, and habits are formed by repetition and consistency. You do something over and over and over again, it turns into a habit, and that's really all our dog training is. But that's what we're trying to do, is form habits. And so when you've got little ones, I think, let's say you're picking up a pup 7 weeks old, 7 or 8 weeks old. For the first 6 to 8 months of training, I'm going to spend probably 75% or more of my time focused on obedience. And I know it sounds really boring, and for a lot of, I actually kind of enjoy it, but a lot of people do think it's boring, and it is a little bit. But the thing about it is, I have to have a dog that has a real good foundation, a good base, and that goes back to obedience. And obedience, when I say obedience, I mean heel, sit, stay, and hear or recall. And if I got those 4 things, I can do just about anything with a dog. And the thing about training dogs, and I think I mentioned earlier, you can't speed train them. It's incremental. We build off of lessons. So A to B, B to C, C to D, we get them to Z. So it takes some time. It takes some repetition. But if we build that good foundation, and I'm going to say that good foundation for me takes anywhere from, say, 8 to 10 months of training. Now, do I forget? I certainly don't forget about the shed stuff. What I do is I focus on the obedience stuff, building that strong foundation. But then all the while, I start adding in and forming these good habits along the way. At 10 weeks old, I'll have, if a puppy is big enough to pick up that training dummy and not struggle, by the time they're 10, 11, 12 weeks, I'll possibly let them start picking that thing up. But I keep it real short. And what I'll do is, for instance, I'll get them in a hallway. I'll close all the doors in the hallway, and I'll pitch that training dummy down the hallway. And I let the little pup chase it. It's just natural. They run down, they pick it up. And retrievers retrieve naturally. That's what we got to remember. We don't train. I've never trained a retriever to retrieve. They do it naturally. I just bring it out of them. And so when they run down and they pick it up, they turn around and they look at me, and I'm down on the ground. And I call them. I get excited. Come on. Here they come. Well, I'll do that 2 or 3 times in a row, and that's it. I don't need to do it for another 3, 4, 5 days, because you got to remember they do that naturally, and I don't want to burn them out, and I don't want them to become overexcited. I want a dog that's going to be calm and quiet, steady. So I don't want to over retrieve. I call them meaningless retrieves. So we're going to start conditioning that little pup early on, but it's really informal. I mean, it's nothing like, people ask, well, how much? People see my dogs and they'll say, gosh, you must spend hours with them. Really? And a lot of times these pups are young, and I'll say, no, it doesn't take that much time, because they're not capable of that. I mean, when they're little pups, say 7 weeks old to about 4 months old, 16 weeks, I'll be real happy if I can get 35 to 30 seconds of focus out of them, because then they're just like little kids.
Right.
They're easily distracted. So it's lots of little short lessons, especially for those first 4, 6, 10 months of training. Once they get over that, usually it's about 10 months. When they get to be about 10 months old or older, I see a maturity take place in them, and they seem to have a little bit more focus. I might be able to get 15, 20 minutes out of them at that point.
Okay.
But the thing is we don't want to rush the process.
Gotcha. Okay. Good tip. Excellent.
So let's talk about a little bit about dog breeds and what a trainer like yourself, Jeremy, would suggest for going into a shed dog. And it could be a broader horizon than what I'm thinking. I'm thinking naturally you're going to go with a retrieving dog, such as a lab, or, I'm focused on a lab. Now, tell us some different breeds and the most likable breed to become a good trainable shed dog.
Sure. And you touched on it, and I hear it all the time, is, do you have to have a lab to do this? And people oftentimes ask me, because I've always got labs. I'm always training. I'm training specifically English labs. I get all my dogs. They all come from the same kennel. They come from a kennel down in Oxford, Mississippi. It's a 14-hour drive for me to get down and pick these pups up. All of my personal dogs come from there. All my client dogs come from there. It's a place called Wild Rose Kennel, and they've been importing dogs since the early 70s, and they're European lines. So that's my preference. And, a lot of people will say, well, do you have to have one like that? Absolutely not. The reason I have that dog is because it fits my style of training real well, and it fits what I'm going to do with it real well. A lot of my dogs, my personal dogs and my client dogs that I train, are going to be multi-purpose. We're going to use them for shed hunting. We're going to use them for tracking, finding wounded deer. I use them for birds, both upland and waterfowl. I've got one right now that's being certified therapy dog, works with kids that have autism and different disabilities. And I've got one that I'm working on right now that's actually going to be a service dog for PTSD veteran. So same, and these dogs do all of it. I mean, that dog is doing all of them. Shed hunting, tracking, the birds, all the service stuff, all the therapy stuff. So they're certainly not limited in the idea of, you buy a dog for shed hunting, it's only going to be a shed dog. When it comes to the breeds, I've always been a believer in the idea of you buy a dog that fits your style. And it doesn't matter what breed it is. I think you have advantages with certain breeds when it comes to the shed hunting, because you mentioned it, a retriever retrieves naturally. That's one less thing I have to train them to do. So I think you have advantages with certain sporting dogs, and I think you have advantages with certain sporting breeds that will have a natural retrieve, have a tendency to have what I call natural game finding ability, strong noses. That's all stuff that I think is important to take into consideration. But the style of dog and the style of your family or your lifestyle, I think is a real important match that has to fit. I oftentimes laugh about it and I say, a 5-person family doesn't buy a 2-seat sports car. It doesn't fit what you're going to do with it. So I think it's true with dogs. I like these little English dogs, these little British, some people call them British dogs. Really, they're European lines. They're European field lines. They've got great noses, but they're very, very soft temperamented dogs. They're real good in the house. The reason I use them in the schools and that is because they're so mild. They're just very, very good temperament. Calm, naturally calm dogs. Where, some people see my dogs and they go, well, those aren't labs. I go, what do you mean it's not a lab? And they go, there's no way a lab is that calm. Well, the reality is originally labs were extremely calm, extremely biddable, willingness to please, real easy, what I call easy dogs to train. And I think there's a misconception out there that, and part of it comes from field trials, and I'll catch a lot of grief for this. And I don't say it because I don't like field trial dogs. I don't say that at all. I think they're super impressive, very, very impressive. But I think what's happened is specifically the lab breed has been it's been marked as a dog that's got a lot of drive, high energy, almost to the point of hyper. And that's definitely not what they started out to be, but they've evolved into that. And part of it has to do with our field trial system, American field trial system. It requires a dog's got to be pretty high drive, real hard charging. I always say if the American field trial dogs were people, they'd be in the NFL. I mean, they'd be professional athletes. And my little dogs that I'm training are not nearly as bold and high drive, and they're very, very high end in the field, but under a lot of control. And so it's based on, different criteria when it comes to judging on field trials. So that's where that comparison is with a 5-person family by a minivan, not a sports car. And so whatever you're going to do with your dog, I think it's important to take that into consideration. If you're going to have a family dog that lives in the house 12 months out of the year, which is what our dogs do, you want a dog that kind of fits that lifestyle as well. So
absolutely.
It's interesting because breeds come up a lot. Questions come up about breeds a lot, and we've got a Facebook page, DogBone. It's a DogBone Hunter Facebook page, and I've asked the question a couple times on Facebook, and what kind of dogs are you training out there with our systems, and how are things going? And the last time I did it, we had 53 or 54 different breeds comment back that they've used our product line and have had success with their shed dog. And to me, that's a real satisfying feeling, knowing that, we didn't design this to fit one person and with one dog. We tried to build it so it's kind of universal. And I've heard breeds, boy, I've heard some breeds that you wouldn't even believe. I've heard, I've had guys, pit bulls. I've had multiple pit bulls that people have used to shed hunt with. Shepherds are always good. Super intelligent dog, great noses. The pointing breeds. I've got a friend who's got a kennel that raises pointing dogs, German Shorthairs, and they've had a ton of success with shed dogs. So it's certainly not limited to traditional retriever or a lab.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a pretty wide spectrum there of what breeds you can use to shed hunt with.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So let's take a little break, and we're going to do a part 2 on this DogBone shed hunting experience. So we're talking to Jeremy Moore from DogBone Hunter, and when we come back, we'll do part 2, and we'll call it part 2 of DogBone.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, what an amazing experience talking with Jeremy Moore from DogBone.
Just awesome. So if you want to just reach out to Jeremy, and before you get to part 2 here, it is DogBoneHunter.com. And Dusty, just so in case people only get to this episode this week and they want to play the next one another time, how do we reach you online and offline?
Facebook.com/Chubby Outdoors. That's where I'm sticking with it.
Okay. And you can find me and everything that you ever wanted to know about the Big Buck Registry, bigbuckregistry.com, facebook.com/Big Buck Registry, twitter.com/Big Buck Registry. You can find us on YouTube, bigbuckregistry.com/YouTube. If you'd like to submit a buck, just go to www.bigbuckregistry.com/mybuck. And if you'd like to do a share for share because you're in the outdoor industry or outdoor world, or you created a really cool page and you want to get some exposure, there's nothing better than to visit www.bigbuckregistry.com/S4S and give us a call, 724-613-2825. And always, please visit us on iTunes, bigbuckregistry.com/iTunes. Subscribe for free. Give us a review. We would sincerely appreciate it. Let us know how we're doing. Well, Dusty, I think that's a wrap for part 1, and let's get into part 2.
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
Okay.